Ready to go?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. You've probably just heard me say this, but I'm going to say it again for the folks who've just joined. My name is Venu Gupta, and I am the executive director of the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. I'm incredibly grateful to be in this role and doing this work, and grateful to be here in community with you and one of um, one of our colleagues who I find incredibly inspiring and um, just has a level of expertise that I'm awed by. And I'll introduce her in a second. I just want to give you a couple of minutes of background. For those of you that are new to the Lawyers Committee, with respect to protecting the vote, no surprise here, we believe that the right to vote is absolutely fundamental in any kind of democracy. Uh, and our work focuses on eliminating barriers to voting and civic participation, especially in communities of color and low income communities who have historically faced barriers to the ballot box. This this election cycle, this will be more true than it probably has been in our lifetimes before, at least in my lifetime before. Right now, as you likely know, voting rights are under attack. If you've read any of the headlines, you'll see that there are threats to nationalize elections. There are threats about gathering voter data in exchange for other abuses of power. Um, there are kind of throwaway comments about canceling the midterms. So really, there is an effort by the federal administration to stoke fear, violence, and an intimidation in an attempt to pick their voters. That's really what this is about. The current administration feels threatened and is is using its power and position to threaten people and keep people from voting so that it can, as I just said, pick its voters. But that's not how things happen here. We all know that, right? That in this country, our aspiration is that our voters pick our leaders. Now, that has not been true in our country. And at times, sometimes that has been more true or less true. And we are in danger in this election cycle of that being less true. Americans want every eligible voter to vote and every vote that is cast to be counted. So, in addition to the federal overreach, misinformation and disinformation are also really, they're deep threats to our fair and free elections. Here in Illinois and in Chicago, uh, Chicago Lawyers Committee and others we're on high alert and we're closely monitoring the March Illinois primary in anticipation of what could be coming our way. Again, if you've been reading the headlines, you'll see that there have been conversations about ICE being at the polls, and it's hard to know what's a threat and what's actually real, or what might be real and then never happens. So, our goal here is to clarify what we think might be credible worries about voting, what Chicago Lawyers Committee is doing about it, um, not just to protect election integrity, but also to protect voters. Um, so we're going to we're going to talk with you, and we're going to not just talk, we'll talk a little bit about how we're also approaching this in the Midwest, not just Chicago, but in Illinois, Indiana, and more broadly. Um, and finally, how you can help us protect voter access this year. If you are reading the headlines, like I sometimes do, and feel what's the right word? Sometimes I feel like I'm underwater. That's I know that's heavy, but that is the truth of how I feel. Um, and I'm not sure how to get air. And what we are hoping is that this opportunity to engage with voter protection, election protection, will feel like air. There is a large kind of emotional hurdle to get over because sometimes when you feel that way, it feels like nothing can help, but that's not true. We all have agency and power, and engaging in the election protection mechanism is incredibly important, more important than you even may realize. And now I have the pleasure of introducing you to Ami Gandhi, who is the director of the Midwest Voting Rights Program at Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. She is absolutely brilliant. I have been a huge fan of Ami's for decades. And it's such a privilege to get to work with her. And I'm awed by all that she and her team are doing to protect voters in Illinois and Indiana and other places in the Midwest. Ami, take it away.
Thank you so much, Venu. And I'm really excited to welcome all of you. So many people joined us today. So many people who we work with daily to protect voting rights. So this is going to be a great conversation, great opportunity to come together and reflect and figure out how to move forward from here. I'm Ami, as Venu said, I'm Ami Gandhi, and I've been working at Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights about 10 years, and I lead our Midwest Voting Rights program. And I previously in my career had other jobs in the legal sector. I worked at a law firm doing commercial litigation. I worked in the more squarely in the immigrants' rights space, working on voting rights in immigrant communities and other issues as well. And so that's a little bit of background about how I come to this work at Chicago Lawyers Committee, where I have the chance to bring a lot of those different experiences together into the current focus of protecting voting rights, and especially in Illinois, Indiana, and the Midwest.
Thank you, Ami. Ami's being incredibly modest. Every time Ami and I speak to anybody, I always say how modest Ami's being, and she is. Ami is a national voting rights star. And what's amazing about your work, Ami, is that you are both equally respected and admired by people who do kind of impact litigation that's removed from community sometimes, and by folks who are in community and leading those organizations. Um, okay, so I have a lot of questions. Also, folks, we would love to see your faces. This is we're I know we're on screens all the time. I know there's Zoom fatigue. I get it, but we would really love to. Oh, look at that. It's so much better. Thank you. For anybody that's willing and able to put their camera on, we would love it. This is fantastic. Okay, so Ami, why why is voting rights like what is I think we've been putting out a lot of messaging around the urgency, but sometimes even in an email it doesn't come through. What is so urgent about this, and why do we need more than kind of the usual suspects to be engaged?
Thanks, Venu. And I appreciate how you put it at the top of this conversation as well about how we value, and everything we're hearing is that people across America value the right for people to pick our elected officials and not the other way around. And this is urgent right now because of both the threats to voting rights, which we'll talk about today, and also the huge opportunity. We look at it, and I look at it in that dual way in terms of it's not all a bleak picture. I know that may sound hard to believe with all of the headlines, as you mentioned, and they definitely get me down as well. At the same time, there's an incredible opportunity with this being a major election year where we talk to many voters and organizations on the ground who are very energized right now. As far as the threats, I do want to break them down some. We're seeing a lot of increased rhetoric from this presidential administration about nationalizing our elections is one of the terms that's used,
Yep.
including mentioning new nationalized voter ID and proof of citizenship legislation that is not the way our system is right now, and I would say is not even a legally viable route, but those are the sorts of threats that we're hearing from the top. We know that there are federal investigations and actions to seize election materials, including in Georgia, for example, and other types of coercion to get states to turn over their voter rolls and highly sensitive personal information about voters. This type of federal interference that's been happening week after week after week over the last year is unprecedented and should be taken very seriously. It is unusual, it is definitely unprecedented. And the presidential administration has indicated.
So Ami is frozen. I think I was referencing the technical difficulties earlier. Um, Cindy, will you just let Ami know to dial back in? Cool. So here's the thing. I'll follow up on what Ami was saying is that right that this type of federal interference, though that is happening, um, should be taken. It's not unprecedented. We have a long history in this country of interfering with elections when oh, there's Ami. Hi, Ami, welcome back. So I was just, why don't you continue onward? So, if you are ever thinking about donating to Chicago Lawyers Committee, we will use those dollars to support our tech help. We're really sorry for all of the challenges. I'm just one of those days. Um, but as Ami is getting unmuted, here's what I'll say is that the Constitution clearly states that states have control of elections and states are required to not violate voters' rights. There is absolutely no lawful reason that the federal government should have access to determining how states run elections and to voter records. I mean, take it away.
Thank you. I didn't mean to leave in such a dramatic fashion. Thank you all for bearing with me. As Venu was saying, that's exactly spot on. That one of the reasons we're so concerned about these threats from the federal administration is because of the role that states have legally and otherwise for leading our elections. The states are required to not violate voters' rights, of course. And so I'm not suggesting that their power is unchecked, but they have an extremely important role and have done that trust building. You know, state and local authorities have done that trust building with voters for many years as is part of their role and part of why elections have integrity and run smoothly and have trustworthy results. And so it's very important to us all. Maybe this goes without saying, but it's very important for us to uphold and protect that and fight for that. The national rhetoric isn't dangerous only because it spreads misinformation, but also because it has a chilling effect on people exercising their right to vote. And I in my everyday work try to balance both raising the alarms about this very real chilling that's happening, while also I don't want to be so alarmist that I'm further chilling voting for people who want to participate and have a path forward to do so safely. And so in that regard, many people are watching the Illinois primary closely. Coming up soon, we're already in the election cycle. Voters in Illinois are already voting early and voting by mail. And then the election day for the primary election will be on March 17th. And Illinois is the first state that has a major primary election this year that has been targeted by federal immigration enforcement. And so that is real for some of our clients and community partners. and definitely of concern to Chicago Lawyers Committee. But it's important for voters to remember that this sort of tension and chilling is exactly the intended result of these intimidating efforts and this federal overreach. And our message is don't let them intimidate you. Don't let them intimidate us. Our elections and our democracy will be the strongest. And that's what history has taught us as well. When all of us show up and speak out and refuse to be intimidated. In Illinois, thankfully, under the Illinois election system, there are several different options for how voters can participate in a way that's safe and comfortable for all eligible voters. And we're here to help.
Ami, thank you. I just want to call out a few things that all of what you said is important, but a few things that had stuck in my mind from your response. One, there's groups on the ground are energized and see opportunity here. Um, and I think one of the things we've seen is that it's the people on the ground that are going to be the ones to stand up to protect our democracy. We will all be part of it, but it really is all of us and others in our everyday capacity as ordinary people showing up. So there's an opportunity here, and we shouldn't lose that. Two, that all of the things that are coming out of the federal administration, the rhetoric, the fight, the suing of state governments, all of that is intended to scare and chill people from voting. That is absolutely the point. So, one of the things as we're talking about this to think about is if you're feeling worried about voting, what is it that you can do to feel more safe? Do you go with a bunch of people? Do you know people who might be concerned about voting? Do you offer to go with them? Do you sign up to do election protection? This is going to combat that chilling effect. It is going to take all of us having courage in ways that we may not have been called on to have courage before. Um, so just something to think about. I mean, the second question, you're right. Like every week, every 36 hours, there's some headline about federal overreach into state election systems. What is going on with the Department of Justice and state voter rolls? Why do they want them? What are they going to do with them? Have they gotten any, and what's going to happen there?
Thanks, Venu. For all of the scary examples that I'm about to give, I do want to mention at the outset that there has been an incredibly strong litigation response across the country, so many different partners coming together. Certainly, Lawyers Committee and local Lawyers Committee affiliates, as well as other esteemed colleagues in the fight for voting rights. In Fulton County, Georgia, for example, the Trump administration launched an investigation to seize their ballots, voter rolls, and more materials related to the 2020 election, seemingly in a desperate attempt to continue to try to spread misinformation and disinformation about the integrity of a several years ago election. And we've seen overreach in Minnesota, talking about closer to Midwest, closer to our communities, when the US Attorney General sent a letter to the governor demanding that they turn over their voter rolls in exchange for retreating federal agents from Minneapolis. I mean, totally uncalled for and inappropriate and illegal. Illinois also has been the subject of federal overreach. And shortly before the December holidays, the US Department of Justice sued the bipartisan Illinois State Board of Elections, demanding voter rolls, sensitive data, personally identifying information about every single Illinois registered voter. And this is data that is protected under state and federal law, protected from the federal government doing this kind of overreach. And when Illinois refused to turn this over inappropriately to turn over an excessive amount of personal voter information, the DOJ responded by suing the state of Illinois. And Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights was very proud to, alongside our partners, challenge this federal overreach by moving to intervene in that case. It's called United States versus Matthews. And the litigation process is moving forward at this time where we're coming at it from the point of view of voters. That's our bottom line. As a nonpartisan organization focused on voter access, we moved to intervene because that voice was not yet represented in the litigation. The kind of community members and individual voters and organizations on the ground who we work with every day. And we were hearing from voters, including naturalized citizen voters, people with past criminal records, of varied categories of people who the federal government has been explicitly singling out in trying to obtain this personal information and threatening to try to kick people off of the rolls illegally. We want to make sure to be responsive in these times when there's this severe escalation in pursuit of the administration's real goal to control who can vote and have a say and who can't. And so we will continue the fight to safeguard voters' rights in the face of these challenges. We hear a lot in the headlines about the back and forth between the federal government and particular states or particular leaders or governors. That's all very important. We track all of that as well. And what we refuse to have get lost in all of that political back and forth is the point of view of voters who are trying to participate. And we don't ask people who they vote for. And we want every eligible voter to have a chance to access voting in the way that's safe and comfortable for them.
Yeah, let me just emphasize that last point. I think that the federal administration has done a really unbelievable job of making people believe that voting is somehow partisan. The right to vote is partisan. It's not. We are we are proudly nonpartisan. We practice in Illinois and in Indiana. Um, and what we want to protect is one of the pillars of this country, which is the right to vote for everybody, irrespective of who you vote for. Um, Thank you, Ami, for that. Um, I think I think it's really just to, and I know many folks on this Zoom appreciate this, but just how important the right to vote must be if the federal government wants voter information so badly. It is sacred. And if they are willing to go to such great lengths to get it, um, it's because of how sacred it is. So I'm moving on to question 3, Ami. So getting back to this idea that there is opportunity here, for folks who aren't familiar with sort of the cadence of what happens when Congress or the executive branch isn't as friendly to civil rights protections, typically then states start to look inward and see how do they build those protections within a state instead of looking for enforcement or guidance or um, um, support from the federal government. So Chicago Lawyers Committee, because it works in practice with community organizations, has been working on protecting voting and thinking about protecting voting on the ground with communities for quite a while, and now is working alongside other coalition members to bring about the Illinois Voting Rights Act of 2026. This is hugely important. If you don't know very much about it, maybe someone from the team could put it in the chat. You definitely need to know about it. Um, and if it's something you support, call your state reps. But I'm going to let Ami tell you about the details of it.
Thanks, Venu. Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights is proud to be working alongside the Eugenia Burns Hope Center, Change Illinois, NAACP, East St. Louis Branch, and others, and alongside Senator Graciela Guzman and other organizations and community to help advance the Illinois Voting Rights Act of 2026, as Venu mentioned. This is really important legislation at the state level that will streamline and strengthen protections that our communities have long relied on at the federal level, like the Federal Voting Rights Act, often called the crown jewel of the civil rights movement. But that because of US Supreme Court decisions in recent years is not guaranteed any longer to be intact. And the Illinois Voting Rights Act of 2026 can be a path forward, if passed by the Illinois legislature, to ensure voting rights for Black and Brown voters and voters whose first language is not English. And the state of Illinois has the opportunity to take control of protecting the right to vote by codifying the core protections of the Federal Voting Rights Act of 1965 into state law so that voters' rights are not hanging in the balance at the whim of the US Supreme Court decisions alone. Our hard fought civil rights that communities have fought for generations are being eroded with the passing Supreme Court decisions, and the right to vote is no exception to that, unfortunately. Federal courts have narrowed the Voting Rights Act, the Federal Voting Rights Act, and weakened it over time, as some of you may have heard, and there's an additional pending Supreme Court case right now about this Federal Voting Rights Act as well. In that situation, states must step in and ensure that voters are not left vulnerable to the further erasing of our rights. Several other states have all passed their own modern state voting rights acts to guarantee protections for voters in those states. Minnesota, Washington State, New York, Connecticut, the list goes on. And it's time for Illinois to do the same, to pass a modern state voting rights act. And there still are, we get the question a lot, if there are barriers to voting in a place like Illinois. And I think it's a fair question. And although Illinois and the voting conditions in Illinois are not the same as some parts of the South, for example, or New York, for example, nonetheless, we hear from voters who call us at 866-OUR-VOTE or who are our clients or partners about the continuing disparities in voter access in Illinois, especially for communities of color. And that can lead to situations where eligible voters are prevented, even if it was not intentional, but where they can be prevented from electing a candidate of their choice or from having a robust voter turnout. And we know one thing that Senator Graciela Guzman has stated very articulately is that our democracy does not run on autopilot. We've all gotten a lot of reminders of that in the recent days and weeks and months. Unfortunately, here's something proactive the state of Illinois can do that shows that it's being vigilant and protecting voters' rights to have a fair and meaningful opportunity to cast their ballot and have a vote that counts. And so that's one of the initiatives that's been very positive. You know, I mentioned earlier that it's not all a bleak picture, believe it or not, when it comes to voting rights and democracy issues in 2026. And this is one of those real bright spots for our very hardworking Midwest voting rights team and our partners to keep working toward progress in trying to make the Illinois Voting Rights Act of 2026 a reality. Some really innovative thinking going into that, how to make the election system more fair in a state who would hopefully be open to that.
Ami, thank you for that. I was wondering, as I'm veering off our stated questions for a minute, but I think there are many people here who know what the the Civil Rights Act, what protections it offered, but I also think there are many who don't. And it might just be helpful to say what originally, what were the protections that the Voting Rights Act offered? Not all of them. You could just like what were the highlights, and then it'll, I think, give people a sense of what is starting to be what has already been eaten away at, and what are the next, where the next challenges might be.
Sure. In a nutshell, the Federal Voting Rights Act protects against discrimination in voting and including protections against vote dilution, for one, when we talk about district lines and redistricting and election systems, and also vote denial. And the one part of the Federal Voting Rights Act that is also important, including for the work of Chicago Lawyers Committee and many of our partners, is ensuring language access to the polls for people who are eligible to vote and who are still in the process of learning English. That's a very important reality for several parts of Illinois. And the Illinois Voting Rights Act will, if passed, ensure that elections in Illinois are fair and accessible to everyone who's eligible to vote. The law would protect Illinois voters against the further weakening of federal protections and strengthen the legal tools to combat voter suppression. It would also create stronger protections against unfair districts or election systems that prevent Black or Brown community members from having a real chance to elect the candidates of their choice. And then would also, as I mentioned, expand language access requirements for eligible voters who have limited English proficiency or who are still in the process of learning English.
Thank you, Ami. I think what's really important, that when as you were speaking about this, what really strikes me is that this was the Voting Rights Act in the mid 1960s. People, communities, systems continued to try to circumvent it, um, creating barriers for people to vote. Um, I mean, the ridiculous stuff, like you have to be able to do A or B or C to be able to vote, which is absolutely which runs up against the denial of voting. Um, and now we see that same effort reappearing in different ways. If you look at the SAVE Act, right? Like, how can we put up, the administration is constantly talking about or trying to support efforts to create barriers to voting, and that the reason that those voting protections were put in place are still very much true today. And so, I think we look at that history, the history of the civil rights movement, and it can feel really embalmed or dated. And yet, those protections, as Ami said, like those protections constantly need to be supported, reasserted, made permanent as part of our culture in the United States, because they're not yet. Okay. So, reminder, please put your questions in the chat, or if you have, because we're about to get to the Q&A part. If you look on your Zoom screen and you look to the far right, there's a little button that says more. If you press on that button, it will say Q&A. You can also put your questions in there. And I'll ask Ami the questions in a few minutes. So we will definitely get to them. And Sadie, I see that you have put a question in the chat too, so we'll get to that as well. All right. So because the Chicago Lawyers Committee feels so strongly about elections. We have not only do we work on litigation and policy around election integrity, but we also have a robust election protection program. So what does election protection actually mean, Ami? I'm sure everyone's reading. What does it look like on the ground?
I love that we have a ton of election protection pro bono volunteers here. That's very exciting for me, especially as the primary elections are coming up soon. So we have so many of us who are in it together. And I just want to start off by saying that. And so, as a lot of the folks here know who have been hard at work one election after another over the years with us, with Chicago Lawyers Committee, we're really proud that we have the opportunity to help voters over the phone and in person during elections. People can call us at 866 Our Vote, the National Nonpartisan Election Protection Hotline, and we take the calls from Illinois and Indiana. When I say we, I mean our small but mighty staff and an army of pro bono volunteers. You don't have to be a voting rights attorney every single day in order to help voters during elections. And we provide CLE training, and pro bono attorneys will often sign up for, limited stint with us helping voters. And so we train people to answer hotline calls to 866 Our Vote. There are companion lines for other languages as well, so that you all know. And we also train people up to serve in the field to help voters in person as nonpartisan poll watchers in Illinois, in Chicago, and also in several suburban areas. Definitely the need has grown. We've been called upon to go to more and more locations over time, especially because of the growth of voters who are looking for help and looking to assert their rights in places even outside of the city. And we handle questions from voters in a problem-solving spirit that range from more logistical and bureaucratic to things that are weightier legal issues. So we get a lot of questions about when and where and how people can register to vote under the Illinois election system. There are a lot of encouraging answers to give people with election day registration and a lot of the other procedures that the Illinois election system allows. People also have questions about accessing their polling place and about needing accommodations, for example, for a health or disability reason, for a language access reason, and so on. And I can provide examples if that's helpful, but I wanted to let you know, all of you, how important of a role the legal volunteers play in escalating the issues to get a resolution as soon as possible before the polls close so that a voter can have a vote that counts that day. And also to problem solve a lot of the issues that our pro bono volunteers tackle can lead to a resolution right then and there. So it's really encouraging and satisfying in that way. And we want to make sure that all voters, whether that's more of where you're coming from, for some people listening in here, of what you may be focused on with the election coming up is making a plan to vote and making sure you're registered or know how to get registered. If you haven't done that yet, getting familiar with different options depending on what you may prefer, voting on the day of or by mail or early voting, and having trusted resources handy if you're looking for more information like about 866 Our Vote and election protection, or from other sources, reliable sources, especially for getting information about voting rights. We have so many stories of how we've helped individual voters. We had a hotline call come in a few years back where an eligible voter, so someone who's eligible to vote and who was on pre-trial electronic monitoring, kept running into barriers. He knew that technically, he had done his research, he knew that technically he had the right to vote, but there was a lot of coordination required between the corrections department and the election authority and us trying to advocate, him trying to assert his rights. Eventually, it all got arranged and he was able to move forward and get permission to travel to his polling place and have a vote that counted that day. And so we love to see that. And in many situations, we help open up the lines of communication between voters and local election authorities.
I mean, that's such a powerful story. And I think if any of us could have the determination or half the determination or a quarter of the determination of that person, we can push back against this effort to shrink the electorate, right? So I'm going to get to questions now. We have one last thing to talk about sort of what you can actually do. And first, I just want to say that one thing you can do before folks start to head off is that we are in the middle of a campaign to raise $100,000 in February. Um, and we're very close. We're at 85,000. We have 15,000 to go in 3 days, 2.5. I think we're going to get there because I know people care about this deeply. I think one of the lessons that I've learned is that we cannot take for granted that the things that existed will continue to exist. And so, if Chicago Lawyers Committee and the work that it does is aligns with your values, um, shares the vision of a future that you want for yourself and your loved ones, um, I would highly encourage you to donate and help us reach this goal so we can stop sending out emails about the campaign, and help fund both education, litigation, policy, and the election protection work. If someone could, oh, great. Thanks, Jody, for putting that in the chat. And every dollar counts. No gift is too big or too small. Second, there are a whole bunch of other things that you can do. Ami's going to talk about signing up volunteers. And I just want to add before that, we are looking for 50 more poll watchers in the field. 50. I'll usually give a bigger number to try and get to the actual number, but 50 is the real number. And I think with everybody on this call, that if we, and I know there are many of you who are already volunteering, fantastic. Bring a friend, somebody who hasn't done this but um is feeling like they don't know what to do. This is the thing to do. I mean, what else can folks do to not take democracy for granted, to get in the fight?
We definitely need a boost in more election protection volunteers, as Venu and my other colleagues have mentioned. And you see in the chat the sign up link to volunteer. So please consider that. And there you'll see when you click into the form that you'll have a partner. You can bring someone along with you, as Venu mentioned. And we provide a CLE training for those in the legal profession who are interested in that. And we're here to support voters and volunteers in the great work that everyone's going to be doing together on March 17th. We also ask you to remember 866 Our Vote, share it with your contacts. We can provide you with a graphic if that's the easiest way for you to share out the information, because we will be ready. We will be ready to answer voters' calls. We get a lot of calls on election day, as you all can imagine, and we're pleased to take them and help anyone and serve as a reliable source of information for anyone who may need help.
Thanks, Emmy. I mean, I know you had a question for me and I want to answer it, but there's an important question in the chat that I want to uh ask, which is the question is, are you anticipating the deployment of ICE Border Patrol agents at polling places? If yes, what is your anticipated response to that?
It's a really heavy question and a totally appropriate one given the times that we're in. So thank you to the participant for asking that. We are preparing that we have to be prepared for a lot of different scenarios, including that possibility. And we need to be ready for that. We're engaging in more collaboration with state and local government authorities than ever before to have a coordinated plan for response if such an event occurs. We co-lead a language access and voter safety coalition with many different partners, including Asian Americans Advancing Justice Chicago and numerous amount of community organizations who do language and cultural specific work in their respective neighborhoods and communities to have a plan in place to support voters on March 17th. We have been coordinating closely with Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights about the different types of responses that are needed. You know, we have it down in terms of responding to voters about voting rights and election law questions. And we also fully understand that's not the only relevant worry on our community members' minds, including naturalized citizen community members who may be interested in exercising their right to vote and have other fears and realities to be thinking about at the same time about what is safe to do. And so we are very grateful to have a chance to sync up the voter protection efforts with the ongoing incredible family support and community defense work going on in our immigrant communities in Illinois. And so we hope that we're over preparing in these litigation preparations and in all of the collaboration, including with our partners who work every day to protect the rights in immigrant communities. But we have to be ready. And so that's what we will do.
And I just to maybe drill down on what Ami said. I know that hearing words like coordinated and we're talking to this people doesn't feel very tangible. But like for an example, as an example, one tangible thing is we're making sure that we don't send one, there will be a training um that will give some guidance, but two, we won't send any poll watchers. Correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, right? We're going to make sure that poll watchers, where the places we send poll watchers, there are two. So, and I don't think we've done that before, so that we're making sure, right? Like this idea that there's greater safety in numbers. I mean, is that correct?
We're bringing back some of the pre-COVID approach.
Yes.
So we're glad to have partners again. We're pleased to do that. And we will have field captains, as we've had before, staff and experienced pro bono volunteers to support field volunteers. And we are here to answer any questions that pro bono volunteers may have.
Um, yeah, so I think the important thing to know is it's on everyone's radar that they may be here, and the legal community, organizing community, the state system infrastructure, we're all thinking about it. And the goal is to have protections so that voters feel safe and are safe. There was a question about do people who volunteer have to have a legal background?
We welcome everyone to volunteer with us. For the field opportunity for voter protection, there is a requirement that you be registered to vote in Illinois. And our sign-up form will take you through all of that. So don't feel like you have to memorize all the different requirements, but non-lawyers are welcome too. And thank you to our colleague Kiana Henley for putting more information in the chat as well.
And finally, I love this question. What's the best way to continue to stay informed on what CLC is doing, like more events like this? Yes, we will be having more events like this. And are we willing to do more of these in communities and in different languages?
Yes, yes to all of that. And we're glad to work with partners as well who have been hard at work for months now in different in-language events for voters. And there are some of the events that we already have been doing as our Midwest voting rights team. We share some of the announcements to the public for some of the ways that people in different communities convene. There may not be a public notification of it as public as this webinar, for example, but we still show up, when hundreds of community organizations are assembled and looking for know your voting rights information, for example. Some of those events have occurred in, specific communities of color. Some are on the calendar that will be happening over the next few weeks. And yes, if any nonpartisan civic organizations are interested in connecting with us about additional needs that are not on our radar yet, then please do reach out.
Um, yes. So I think you'll get an email after you've attended this, and we'll have the name of someone you can reach out to uh, in that email, I hope, or otherwise we'll find you and get in touch. Thank you. I think that's it. Let me see. Did I miss anything in the chat? Um,
Can I just mention too
yeah, of
that
course.
part of the beauty of this is that we have been working with some of these partners, including in immigrant communities, for a long, long time on elections. And I know there are a lot of election protection volunteers on this webinar who know that very well because you all have been working with voters and organizations trusted in those communities for a long time. I think that's a great thing. For example, our program counsel, Connor Kozichek, he has been doing Know Your Voting Rights trainings in a huge diversity of immigrant communities for past elections too, not just with the present threat. So I'm very excited. We can build on that and adapt to the unique moment that we're in now.
Ami, thank you for mentioning that. I would say not only is it a great thing, it's the most effective thing. It is when we are in partnership with organizations on the ground and communities on the ground, we are able to actually meet the needs that and challenges that they're facing, as opposed to deciding what those challenges might be and building something on our own that may or may not be helpful. And your team has done a tremendous job of building trust across neighborhoods and communities in Illinois and Indiana. And we believe that the abuses of power that are coming to the Midwest, as we've already seen, will just grow, um, because there are many states in the Midwest that feel like a threat to the administration, and the administration, when threatened, um, has been quite vengeful. So, uh, and we are prepared and we are ready to help build voter protection and election integrity, more deeply in the states that we're at and be helpful to states in the Midwest who don't yet have it. Any last questions? Um, so there are lots of ways to get involved, folks, if you're not already. We're very grateful that you took an hour to be with us today. We will have another event in March, March 27th. I'm going to say the wrong date. Jody will put it in the chat. Thanks, Jody. We hope you'll be there. And please, whether you do it with Chicago Lawyers Committee or not, get involved. It really is going to take all of us to get through this together, and then we'll build something better. Thank you all so much for your time. We're so grateful and um, feel really lucky to have you as part of our Chicago Lawyers Committee community. Have a wonderful afternoon.